Hello everyone, and welcome to How Does University Leadership Need to Change? Future Planning, Future-Proofing and Innovation. The latest in a global series of roundtable discussions brought to you in partnership between Times Higher Education and PwC. My name's Anna McKee, I'm a reporter for THE and I'll be chairing today's session. But first off, I'm going to hand over to Kat McCusker, PwC's education lead, who will say a few words before we get going into today's discussion. Hi, Kat.
Thanks, Anna. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kat McCusker. I'm a partner in PwC and the education leader. I'm really delighted to be with you all here today and to have such a brilliant lineup of participants joining us for this event. Thank you first and foremost for being part of today's roundtable discussion. This forms part of a series of global events that PwC is running in partnership with the Times Higher Education. To date, there has been some roundtables hosted in the Middle East and future ones planned for South Africa, Singapore and Australia throughout July and August. It's important to let you know that the information that will be shared today will be used to develop a short article afterwards, in which the content may be attributable through quotes and insight. This will be hosted on a co-branded PwC and Times Higher hub. Key insights will also be used as part of a white paper that is being developed and launched at the Times Higher Education World Academic Summit later this year. The pandemic continues to bring challenges and uncertainties for every sector, and absolutely our sector across education is no exception. There are a huge number of challenges, many of which we've covered throughout our webinar series this year. And as universities look to navigate through the pandemic, priorities have included a focus on mental health and well-being, services for staffs and students, supporting them in reimagining a new student experience, the people agenda, and realigning costs to deal with huge changes in both revenue and cash flow. The focus of today's roundtable is how universities' leadership needs to change. And after such a challenging year for us all, future planning, proofing, and a focus on innovation and disruption has never been so critical. In PwC's recent UK CEO survey, over 2/3 of our CEOs are increasing their investment and focusing on leadership and talent development. While many recognise a focus on diversity, inclusion, well-being, workforce engagement and culture can help provide a competitive edge. I'm really looking forward to hearing your thoughts today, and I know that Anna will help to ensure that we cover a wide range of different questions to provide both an interesting and thought-provoking discussion. Anna, I'll hand back over to you.
Thanks very much, Kat. Yeah, as she said, the overhaul of higher education in the UK requires not just a digital transformation, but also a cultural one. And this obviously creates many strategic challenges for senior leaders as they must manage and galvanise their university's people and processes. So to begin with, I'm going to start to ask all the panel to just give me their thoughts. And if people could first say their name, title and affiliation just in this first round, that would be fantastic. And I'm going to start off with what recent changes, such as flexible working and studying, have benefited institutions and why they have done so. So, for example, have HiFlex, hybrid and flexible course models, increased collaboration and innovation. I'm just going to go around here. I can see first on my screen. So Nick, would you like to jump in?
Thank you very much. So my name is Nick Plant and I'm the Deputy Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation at the University of Leeds. Going first in some ways gives me the easy pot, and I'm going to pick flexible working. I think the one thing that we've actually all learned from working from home is that we can get our work-life balance better. The time we've spent commuting, we can actually now spend with our families. And if we need to work more flexibly, we can still do so because the office is quite literally very often in our bedrooms. So I think flexible working has given us some great challenges, but actually also a real potential model for the future in terms of how we meet the needs of our staff in terms of both their work and their life. Thank you.
Thanks, Nick. Simon Green, I'm going to come to you next.
you, Anna. This is like a roulette at the moment, really, isn't there?
Yes,
a Russian roulette almost in that sense. So who's next? So hi, everybody. Look, I'm Simon Green. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor for Research at Aston University. So I'm going to follow up from Nick, because I think this is a really interesting question. I don't think we fully understood yet how the dynamics of dynamic working, of flexible working, are going to look like in the future. Because on the one hand, it is, of course, as Nick has rightly said, it is empowering, and it does give us a real advantage in terms of adapting to the flexibility of our staff and giving them more flexibility. But equally, we also know that that this kind of working works better for some kind of activities than others, and in particular transactional activities, transactional business, that works fine. Anything which requires you to actually have a proper discussion and a debate where you're kind of looking for nuance and body language, it's much harder to do that. So I think there's going to be a case of that from, in terms of us as a unit, as an organisation. But I think the other real issue around this, the much bigger issue, which we haven't even begun properly to get our head around here, is what this means, how our students will react to this, because I think that is the big thing where there's lots of discussion in the sector at the moment, and in Times Higher and Wonky, you see almost on a daily basis about what is it that students really want in the future, and there's a lot of contradictory evidence around this, and I suspect that that's something which will take a little bit longer to unpick, but that may actually run quite counter to what the idea of having a very flexible workforce, because actually many students, I suspect, will probably quite want to see their academic staff and their lecturers and their seminar tutors on campus so they can talk to them.
Great, yeah, there's some really great points there. Robin, I'm going to come to you next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Robin Mason. I'm Pro Vice Chancellor International at the University of Birmingham. If I may, Anna, I'll be more general and less specific, in that I think what has changed at the University of Birmingham, or what has accelerated, is a general culture of change and adaptability. Now, I have to acknowledge at the outset that there's been an awful lot of change, an awful lot of adaptability. So there is some sense of exhaustion or real stretch, but at the same time, I think there's a sense of it's remarkable what we've, as a sector, have all done over the last 18 months, and a real desire to keep that conversation going about what can change and what needs to change. And I think underpinning that actually is the clarity that's come with the degree of change that's needed, because it's really shone a light on the central purposes of university. I think that we've made changes in order to ensure the continued learning of our students, and we've made changes so that we can create the knowledge that's needed to combat a virus and all the societal changes. And it's really kind of pinned us back to our core purposes as universities. And being a bit controversial, at times over the last decade, perhaps we've lost that sense of a sector of what it is that we're trying to do. So I'd say the thing that we want to keep is that sort of self-belief that we're able to do remarkable things over a very short period, even if it's exhausting. But keeping adapting and changing for the better, that would be something that we very much want to retain.
Yeah, it certainly has shown how adaptable people and institutions can be. Tim, I'll come to you next on this.
Thanks, Anna. So Tim Quine, I'm Deputy Vice Chancellor with the Education Portfolio at Exeter. I think so, building on Robin's reflections there, we have seen a sort of transformation in pedagogic approach and the delivery model in a period of time that would be unimaginable when we wrote our education strategy, 18 months before the pandemic, which saw many of the changes there, changes to more blended models of learning, to an increased focus on deep engagement with the subject, increased accessibility to digital learning resources. But we have had to do that at a huge pace. I think the reason it was possible to do it at pace was that we had a sort of dual approach of creating a set of institutional design principles, but giving departments autonomy. And that mix of a sort of central vision alongside a departmental interpretation was critical. And I think the other critical element was really close working between our professional service teams and our academic teams. And I think that's led to a greater mutual respect, which I think is something that we'll certainly want to build on into the future, because the pace of change was only possible because we had that mutual respect for the teams in place. I think one of the challenges going forward will be that quandary of evidence in the response to the Manchester's announcements about didactic teaching going online and the student response to that. We've got a quandary where there are real pedagogic advantages in a blended model, but at the moment we haven't really explained those to students well enough, and I think we'll have to go through a pendulum before we land on the sweet spot of the right sort of pedagogy and social learning that makes the most of digital transformation.
Great, some really good points there. Dave, I'm going to come to you next.
Thank you, Anna. So Dave Phoenix, Vice Chancellor of London South Bank University and CEO of the LSBU Group. I'll build on the points that have gone, because I think there has been a lot of change, both with Brexit and the pandemic, and just general direction of travel around policy. And actually, we haven't really got blended learning or flexible working at the moment. We've got hybrid systems because we haven't fully developed the long-term approaches. But I do think that at the current time, if I was to highlight a real positive, it's been around the engagement with technology, because we might not be where we will end up yet, but it's forced us to engage with technology in a much more proactive way. It's forced us to make the time. And on curriculum development, there's been some fantastic innovation from colleagues, both in terms of professional services and academic staff. And the feedback from students show that some of those innovations are supporting people with a more diverse range of needs. They are supporting students to gain the knowledge in different ways. And there's been some really positive feedback as well as challenges raised. So I think the engagement with technology in that regard has been good. I think technology and staff engagement, I think, has been positive. You know, I mean, when I used to go around the departments and I'd meet with staff and we'd talk about things that were happening, you always had different percentages of staff that would turn up. Some departments more than others, and maybe it was my presentation. But by use of Teams, the proportion of staff tuning in to talk and ask questions about what's going on and give their views has significantly gone up. And we've seen a big jump of about 15% in our staff engagement by wider use of technology to give people opportunities to engage with leadership and each other. And finally, in terms of work, that hybrid system, while it's not perfect yet, the flexibility has been beneficial. We've had feedback from colleagues that they would like to operate in a more flexible way moving forward to get a better life-work balance. But we've also found that with the same resource, we've been able to deliver more because, for example, from student services, we've had some staff that have preferred to work lunchtime to late evening. So we've been able to shift people around to give greater cover without any additional resource requirements. So I think it's got benefits for colleagues, as long as we get the balance right and we get the systems right. But it's also got benefits in terms of how the technology is being used for organisational efficiency and student support. I'll stop.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that was great. There's plenty there to think about. Sharon, can I come to you next, please?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. So I'm Sharon Hutley, Deputy Vice Chancellor for Academic Development and Performance at Nottingham Trent University. This is like one of those children's games, isn't it, where you're continually adding to a list and trying to think of something slightly different to say. But I think just 2 points that I would pick up on and build on from what I've heard so far. So I think all of this has made us more human and more humble in how we approach things. And it's particularly picking up on some of what Robin was saying. I think it's made us go back to some of those kind of core principles and core purposes. And I think that's been really helpful at times when, you know, we've been in a time of crisis and needing to draw on people quite heavily and ask a lot of people. And then the second point is that I think we're only really at the start of the change curve ahead of us. I think in the last 12 months or so, we've opened a box and seen lots of possibilities and lots of things. And I think some of it we'll carry on with and some of it we won't, but I don't think we know yet quite which ones we're going to run with, which ones will stick and so on. And that's part of the excitement really, but that's also part of the challenge, I think, for leadership, is how we drive some of that forward and stop, in a sense, people going back to things that were familiar and how they used to be, when actually it would be better to push on and tackle some of the difficulties that we're still facing. So I'll give you one example. You know, I've had a lot of feedback from colleagues this year about how difficult it is to do hybrid teaching, where you've got some students online and some students in a classroom with you, or to do hybrid meetings where some people are in a meeting, some people are online. I think we've got to get better at that. I think the technology hasn't caught up with us yet for doing that well. But, you know, that's kind of what we should be aiming to do, and not say, okay, we go back to all online or all in person. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Sharon. And yes, I realise that so we're all, you know, making a list of good things. If people want to respond to what other people have said when they talk, because we've already gone through all the best things, then feel free to say whatever you like. Kieran, I'll come to you next.
Great, thank you. I want to shift the focus a little bit, because for me, the point you made, Robin, about universities and our civic mission and going back to that, I think the whole process has made us all very reflective, and I mean collectively reflective rather than just institutionally reflective. And I think for me, in light of this conversation, I'd want to focus on a couple of things. I'd want to focus on our capacity to be cohesive and collaborative as opposed to competing with each other. And that's been a real strength, you know, in each institution, but also with institutions, you know, kind of with our own space. And the pandemic, in the way that we work and the way that we work with our students and our staff. So I'd almost want to put that kind of the emotions back into the kind of debate, because actually we've been able to facilitate those changes at the very start of that process in terms of different models of learning. But that's been done because of the excitement and the passion and the energy and the commitment. But also, it hasn't just come from leadership at the top, it's actually come from leadership from below, you know, where professional services staff, students and academics come together to help shape and inform the kinds of learning systems, the kinds of culture that they want to move forward with. And I think for me, that's been one of the most exciting and challenging parts of it, because we're not used to that. And then I think for me, the other one is about novel approaches to learning, and how we're putting kind of, you know, our work in terms of industry collaborations and working with industry and working with business, but also community groups as part of that flexible learning mode in a way that we haven't always been able to kind of do before. So I think for me, it's an emotional endeavour as well as a rational endeavour. So it's not just about systems and processes, but creating, you know, something that I call, you know, learning as living labs, you know, universities becoming the living lab, you know, working on the kind of challenges of tomorrow, but through those very different ways of the way that we might learn. And I think at York, you know, we're having this great debate about lifelong learning, and we were saying, well, actually, it's not lifelong learning, it's about how do we create learning for life in the context of the kind of work that we are doing.
Great, some brilliant points there. Bob, yeah, do you want to sort of talk about your thoughts on benefits or respond to anything that anyone has already said?
Yes, hi everybody. Bob Nicol, Pro Vice Chancellor for Research, Innovation and External Relations at the University of Portsmouth. So yeah, it's always difficult coming at the end of these things, because everybody's sort of taken, I wrote 10 things down and about 9 of them have already been touched upon. But maybe just on Kieran's point about our civic role, I think I've been at Portsmouth for 15 years now, and I've For 14 of those years, I never talked to anybody in the city. The last year, I've talked to many people within our city, and what our research and innovation can do for the city, certainly in the COVID recovery, seems to be absolutely fantastic. So I think it really has, for us anyway, shone a light on our civic responsibility, and I think that will not change. I think we will just build on that in the coming years. With regard to sort of blended teaching, we were already going down that road, but it just got accelerated like everybody else. We had the ambition and we were putting sort of well thought out plans in place, and then suddenly this comes along and you have to do it overnight rather than over a course of several years. I guess the concern for us now is, of course, the planning that we had around our estate and how we were going to build. We were about to invest hundreds of millions of pounds in our estate, in refreshing that estate. And clearly those plans, which were fine a year ago, just do not look fit for purpose today. So I suspect there's going to be an element of the estate having to catch up with the flexible working, both for our staff and students. Maybe on terms of hybrid working for our staff, I would agree with other people that I think it's been absolutely fantastic working sort of operationally over the last year. The ability to spin up teams and have different people from across the university have a quick meeting on Zoom and talk about the operations, talk about moving forward, getting things done. I think that has been incredibly efficient and really pushed forward a lot of the team building that we probably wanted to do, but it sort of happened naturally through the pandemic. But on Monday, our senior leadership came together for a face-to-face strategy meeting, and it just felt fantastic. I think it's going to be very difficult to do sort of complex thinking and strategic thinking if you're not actually sat in the same room together. So I suspect we will start moving to sort of those more complex discussions will be more face-to-face. I think the final thing I would say is that it's really shone a light on our bureaucratic processes. Dare I say, there's almost a tendency now to say there needs to be a bonfire of our policies. Seems to be, some of our committees, I would say, just does not make sense because the teams that are making progress are not aligned with the policies, the procedures, and the committees that we have. So I think there'll be a lot of rationalization around that as well.
Thanks, great. Yeah, some excellent points there. Ian, I'm going to come to you now.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. Ian Greer, Vice-Chancellor at Queen's Belfast. I guess most of it's been said, and I would reiterate the pace of change and the agility has been really important and really impressive to see. And we've been enabled by technology, but we're not really there yet. A couple of people have mentioned that we've moved our teaching online, but have we really made it online teaching, or have we just adapted our content? And another example is, the hybrid meeting model, which just does not work. And it's really difficult. It's fine when everyone's online and fine when everyone's in the room, but the hybrid model is a challenge. Clearly, there are real benefits to staff, but we've not sold them to the students. And I guess the problem in Manchester highlights that. I think we would all think it's really good to have your lecture online because it's a more economical way to pass information over, if you will, and then use the time for face-to-face work in a more constructive way. So clearly we've not sold that to the students, we've not sold them the benefits. And the students are fighting back with a value for money argument too, because they think it's cheaper for us to produce it. And if we were online organizations, it probably would be cheaper, but we're not. We're actual real organizations having to do stuff online, which is probably the more expensive option. So I don't think we've taken the students with us. I completely echo the points about the purpose of a university. We're here for social and economic benefit, and this has reminded us of all of our place in society. And for us, at least, we've found that we've got a major role in reskilling, taking people who've lost their job and furloughed, moving them into new sectors with rapidly delivered new courses for postgraduate certificates that can open the door for someone to enter into a new sector. And I think that's emphasised the lifelong learning role of a university, the role in CPD, and that role in reskilling, not assuming you're going down a one-way street in terms of your career, but being able to navigate through a whole city worth of paths, streets, and boulevards, if you will. And that partnership approach is really important. We've always worked with our local economy, whether that's the businesses or the city council or the regional government. I think that's been emphasised, and I've seen a greater partnership approach in working with many bodies focused on an outcome or a solution rather than being bogged down with the process, which all too often universities fall prey to. We're very process driven at times rather than goal focused. So that new focus on goals, I think, is very welcome. So I've probably been a bit repetitive, Anna, but I think we've got a fair degree of unanimity across the sector now, but we're only halfway there.
Great, thanks. No, that was brilliant, and some great additional points there, particularly like this thing about the purpose of university that quite a few of you have brought up. What my next question was going to be, and it sort of touches a bit on what Ian said about upskilling and lifelong changing, more lifelong learning, things like that. How do we ensure that staff members are supported with all these changes? We've got these new ways of working that we're all talking about, and we're not quite there yet. How do you make sure that support and career development opportunities are there for university staff so that they can deliver on these new exciting elements that you've all mentioned? I'm just gonna let people put up their hands now. So if you'd like to jump in on that, put up your hands either in the chat or I'm not in the chat, on the Zoom, or physically you can raise it as well. Tim, I can see you've got your hand up.
In relation to the need in education to make the major shift to the digital environment, we were really keen that we didn't just do a lift and shift, and we didn't take an on-campus delivery model and turn it into something that was a poor cousin. So we had a focus on enhancement, and as I say, we started from design principles and worked those through, but we also recognised the tiny window available for colleagues to really develop digital learning resources to support their teaching. So we hired nearly 70 recent graduates and trained them as digital learning developers. So they joined our core team, and that enabled us to put in digital learning support in every department in the institution. And we also created internship opportunities for 120 current students to give us live feedback on their experience. And I think that has been critical for us. It was, I say it's about putting pedagogy and people first, and it's to get the pedagogic element in place, but also recognise the stresses on people. I think at the beginning of the year, the feedback was, what can a recent graduate tell us? By the end of the year, it was make sure you don't take our digital learning developers away. So I think there's work we can do there to really build on that sort of model. And I think again we can use digital tools. We can create innovation environments for colleagues to work in. I think the challenge will be trying to work out what's the best model for each discipline, because it's not going to be a one size fits all. But we do want to bring the whole institution with us, and that's really about the usual mechanisms of collaboration and sharing best practice.
Brilliant, a great example there. Robin, I'll jump to you.
So I'm going to try to be slightly provocative, and hopefully that's helpful for the discussion. So I'm a lifelong academic, but I do a number of roles external to the university in public sector bodies. And it always surprises me how much those public sector bodies invest in training and development of staff, even staff outside of the organizations, externals like me. And in contrast, particularly amongst the academic community, I think there's more training and development for professional services staff in universities. We tend not to train and develop our academics. So you get your PhD, and that does you for research training. You learn the rest on the job and by going to conferences and writing papers and grant applications. And you might do a probationary period and some teaching training there. But after that, you're somewhat left to your own devices. I do think one of the things that we're thinking hard about in light of all of this is how do we invest more in our staff to support them and train them for all of the new things coming down the track. We are, after all, learning organizations, and we spend our time teaching and supporting and training our students, but perhaps do less on the staff side. but that might be a little bit controversial, so I'll just leave it there.
Great, always good to have provoking comments, and I can see people's hands went up after that. Nick, you were next that I saw.
Thank you very much. I'm going to continue the slightly controversial side. I think one of the things we really saw through the pandemic was nobody could do this alone, whether it was students feeling isolated in their rooms and needing that contact to be able to learn, or whether it was academics realizing they had absolutely no idea how to teach in a digital space, or how they would continue their research when they couldn't get into their lab. And we suddenly realized that actually we genuinely are a community. So I think before we think about how we use the technologies and train people up, we actually need to take a step back and think about what is the community and workplace we want to live in. And I think we have to go for a much more equal and egalitarian approach. So we have to, and Robin's exactly correct. We have very often a sort of fire and forget approach for academics. You set them on a path and you expect they're going to do brilliant, but actually academics can't survive in isolation. They have to work with others to really grow and survive. They have to work with students, and that partnership actually helps an academic to grow as much as the student, and the same with the academic related services. So I think we all have to take a big step back and look at how we get those interactions working, and actually saying, how do we get people to train each other? So it's not just about giving a course and letting them go. How do we get people to think about where we want to be as a community? And that is one of the, I think, for the University of Leeds, we've been through a tough time over the last 15 months, but actually what's come out of it is a greater sense of unity in many areas, because we realize that if we pull together, we can pretty much beat any real challenge.
Great. Keep the provoking comments coming. But yeah, also some really positive messages there. Kieran, your hand was next.
Yeah, so following the theme of provocation to the debate, I kind of feel like we're missing a step. It's almost that we've gone from one extreme to the other. So, you know, we've had to, because of the pandemic, you know, work and do things differently. But I do think there's a question, picking up on the point that's just, Nick, that you've raised, that says, you know, it hasn't all been wonderful. You know, there's been digital poverty, there's been, you know, all of the kinds of communities that we don't often kind of talk about, but we want them to be our students of the future, you know, in the context of equality, diversity and inclusivity. And so I think in planning for the future and thinking about technology and the kinds of technology we want to be able to utilise and use in that context, I think we have to kind of think about, well, for who exactly? And so it isn't simply about, you know, do we retrain, you know, our academic staff or our professional services staff? I think for me, the question would be a much more critical one. What is it that we are developing for and for who as part of that process? And the one thing, if we've learned, at least certainly at the University of York, that some of the most innovative and the powerful ideas of how we move this forward, when you co-create, you know, when you bring, you know, your students, those community groups, those businesses, in the way that, you know, Robin was articulating, you know, there is much for us to learn from the world outside as there is from the world of education. So I think we have to be open to learning in terms of, you know, leading differently and thinking differently as we begin to kind of rethink technology, the use of technology and the kind of infrastructure. So that's a cultural piece as well. You know, that's a big, big culture change for so many of us, including myself, because I recognise the scenario that Robin, you know, we get leadership training, but the leadership training isn't always the sorts of training that we might need for the future.
Thank you. Brilliant comments there. Bob, you were next.
Well, I just really wanted to pick up on the comment that Robin made about sort of the training of our academics. I mean, I fell into this role almost by accident. I was a pretty high functioning academic and suddenly find myself in senior leadership. And it's a different world. And that, so the first thing I did when I became PVC is I started a cohort training program for the next generation of research leaders. And we now have developed 3 cohort programs taking ECRs all the way through to our next Pro Vice Chancellor, because I won't be here forever. And the response has been spectacular. We've taken now 100 people through that sort of pathway. And it is amazing. I think academics are open to change, and I think they are open to a new challenge in life. I think we've got to get them out of their offices and show them what the opportunities are. And it seems to have been a huge success, to the point now that we're rolling out that cohort training to everybody in the institution, not just for researchers, but we'll do it for professional services, and we'll also do it for teaching colleagues. So, and that cohort bit is all about that networking internally. So someone from humanities is talking to someone from science, who's talking for someone from business or law, and actually they're all growing up together and they're all teaching each other. So I could talk for hours about that, but I really wanted to reinforce Robin's point.
Brilliant, thank you. Dave?
Thanks, Anna. I think I'm perhaps nearer Kieran's position in that I think there's a danger in moving straight to how do we train academics, because that's only actually a narrow part of the question that needs to be asked. I think the first phase has to be to try and articulate a vision as to what it is and why we're trying to do this. And that's a key role for leadership. And it's articulating that vision both internally and externally. You can see by the current media coverage, we've not done that. And on top of that, I think when we articulate that vision, it has to not be based on the past, but on the future. So if you look at the development of micro-credentials, the decoupling of assessment from taught materials, you know, a whole range of debates, both around access and opportunity, positive and negative. So I think phase one has to be to articulate within the context of your institution's mission, why you're trying to do this and what is it you're trying to do to actually get people on side. From there, I think you have to move towards developing a framework or a set of principles, because it's only at that point you can then say, and what does that mean? Not just in terms of supporting academics through, you know, sabbaticals, engagement, you know, addition of learning technologists and the other things we've heard about, but also considering what it means in terms of your IT infrastructure, your professional services support, and the way in which you're going to have to provide opportunities of wraparound support, both for the academics and the students, to make it happen. So I think there's a danger that it's one small part of the picture, and by jumping in, we lose sight of the fact that actually we haven't got there yet, nor have we fully mapped out the journey, and we've not convinced others that it's the right journey.
Thanks, Dave. Simon, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I want to pick up to make 2 points here. But first thing, again, picking up what Kieran has said, because I think that's a really important point here. And if we've got to remember what we've kind of come through as a sector here, and in particular, those of our colleagues who have caring responsibilities, it's been absolute murder for them. It's been really, really difficult for them. And lest we forget, it's not over. It's actually ongoing. There are hundreds of thousands of children who are home from school at the moment, and who's got to look after them? It is largely our colleagues who have to do that because they're self-isolating. So it has been a really difficult time. I think we're going to have a lot of work to do, actually, to help those people who have those caring responsibilities to get their careers back on track. I know that there's a very different lot of diversity in the sector in terms of how, for instance, research activity has changed. I know some institutions have actually grown their research activity. We found it quite hard, but that's because people haven't had time to do the bids over the pandemic, and that of course does have impact on people's career trajectories in that research space. So we've got to be thinking about kind of creatively about how we're going to support our talented staff to get back on track for that. And then the second point on that is it was one that kind of links into a number of contributions, because it's an interesting. One thing that sort of really struck me is there's a shift. There's always been an underlying tension in universities between discipline and institution. Many of our academics are their first port of call, their kind of first identification is with the discipline, not with the institution. And what we're seeing here, I think, as a result of the pandemic, is a greater sense of, and I think a number speakers have mentioned, that a greater sense of awareness of what that institutional identity means. And I think in a way that is an opportunity, but it is also going to be quite a challenge for us. It's in terms of how we're going to encourage our colleagues that it's not an either or between disciplinary affiliation and institutional identity, but it's actually getting to both. We are going to have to become more focused, I suspect, around what the institution does. I think most institutions have got a much clearer sense of what they're doing and how they are contributing to their place and their region than perhaps was the case previously. It's because this is really, the whole pandemic has really brought that into quite sharp relief. But we're going to have to bring our colleagues with us culturally to understand that actually it is okay to think about what the institutional interest is and not just what you're, in addition to what your own disciplinary interest in own disciplinary networks are focusing on.
Thanks, Simon. Ian, do you want to hop in?
Yeah, sure. If we're trying to change academic staff and what they do, we've got to incentivise them. And they're usually incentivised by academic progression, whether that's promotion or increased salary. They tend to behave to achieve these aims, which will be better research outputs, high quality teaching. And staff were very, very worried during this pandemic that their research was damaged or their teaching was different, and how would they be assessed and would this harm them? We went to great lengths to ensure we had a holistic assessment of them this year of what their contribution was overall, rather than go through this sort of tick box approach of what did they do in research, teaching, admin, what were they able to do if they had caring responsibilities and so on. So we looked at it holistically, and that went down very well with staff. So staff were still able to progress, even if their research outputs were less than expected because they'd made up in other areas that were really important to the organisation. So that incentivisation, certainly for us, worked very well.
Great, thanks. It's so helpful to have examples of what's been done and what has been successful. And I wanted to pick up on this point that's been made a few times about civic responsibility and how the pandemic has sort of really highlighted the sense of contribution to the region. I think Ian and Simon have both mentioned that, in contrast with, I guess, some of what you say about the media perceptions and this idea that students aren't getting value for money. Is there a way that universities can sort of better communicate those benefits, and so that sort of these negative perceptions are sort of lessened, and that civic responsibility is sort of brought up? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? Simon.
So I think one of the interesting things which comes out of some of the previous research on this is the image that we have as a set of universities that were kind of quite self-serving. So again, it's obviously not entirely accurate, but that it's about bums on seats rather than about what we're actually kind of doing for our students. And I think there is clearly something that we're going to have to really focus on the value for money proposition. I think is going to be one of the key things. But I think more broadly than that, we're also been in an environment where, and this was picked up, I think, in the first round as well, about competition. I think, Kieran, you made the point actually about competition. We are quite used to being really kind of embracing the competition with alacrity. And I wonder whether that's really going to make sense. If you're in any kind of city and you have multiple institutions, Birmingham, we work very closely with Robin at the University of Birmingham and with our other partners in the city as well. But actually, that's the kind of thing which needs to come to the fore, because if you're in the city, then the idea that we should all be competing with each other to do the same thing and duplicating stuff doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it's about us as institutions shifting our mindset from as much competition as possible and as much collaboration as necessary to the inverse. In other words, as much collaboration as possible, as much competition as necessary. That's going to be kind of a big task for us, I think, as leaders.
Great. Kieran, because Simon mentioned your point earlier, I'll let you go next.
Thank you. And I want to build on that. I absolutely concur with what Simon said, but two things that I want to say that is something distinctive. We cannot just keep talking about universities and our civic mission. We talk a good story, but we don't always walk the path of what it means to be a civic university. And so I think it's really important that we kind of, go back to our roots. So for instance, at the University of York, our next year 10-year strategy is based on public good. But what does public good look like and mean like? And so for me, I just want to add some flesh to that and build on the things that kind of what Simon was saying. So we get bad press because we don't always highlight and illuminate the really great work that everybody around this table I know does, because that civic mission engagement is my research area. But it's how we engage with local communities and how we improve social mobility, how we make access an enabler rather than the visibility that we get for the things that we don't always do. So what is our place in the region? How are we working in areas collectively and collaboratively together? And then I think there is something about what inclusive leadership means within the context of our industry partners, our community leaders, and our public services. So it's not something that we are doing to them, but it's something that we are doing with them. And so I think that's another culture shift for us. And the pandemic has shown us that, huge amounts of what we have done has been part of our civic mission, the way that we've stepped up and helped, in the context of the work that we have done with the NHS, and again, I was from Birmingham previously to joining to York, and both institutions have done amazing work, on that front, but also within the context, those community groups are the ones that we don't really give voice to, that we really need to kind of, re-look at. And then I'm back onto civic in terms of inclusivity. We cannot simply focus on equality and diversity as being, the answers of the future. We have to look at what does an inclusive university look like? What does an inclusive city look like? And then how do universities work with our civic partners to ensure that we are creating an enabling culture? So for me, I'd like us to kind of rethink where leadership starts and finishes. And if you look at the way that communities lead, it's very different to the way that senior academic leadership teams lead.
Thanks very much, Kieran. That was really great. Tim, do you want to come in?
Yeah, thanks. I thought it was a great analysis by Kieran. I think like York, Exeter, just in the process of developing a new strategy, and that sees us saying that we're going to capitalise on the power of our education research to create sustainable, healthy, and socially just futures. So we're not setting ourselves some pretty serious challenge, and that it reflects exactly what Kieran was saying about universities are values-led organisations in my experience. But if you read the media, you wouldn't think that. So there is that. I think, as you indicated in the question, there is that gap, and I think part of the answer will be how we communicate or how we collaborate in our regions. Part of it will be how we communicate, and part of it will be how we co-create solutions. And I think one specific area where I think we can work really closely in our regions is with the other educational providers and institutions. So in Exeter, we've got excellent relationships with Exeter College, with the Exeter Maths School that we co-sponsor, and with the TEDRAG Multi-Academy Trust that we are represented on the governing body. And having that really close join up in an education ecosystem in a specific geographic location gives a bit of flesh to the notion that we're there for part of the, to support the local community. And in that context, we've given it a little bit more flesh still by developing what we call a digital escalator. And the notion of that is that wherever anybody wants to upskill in the digital domain, there is the right place, but it may not be at the university, it might be in the college, it might be elsewhere. And by working in that really specific collaboration, it's possible to illustrate that in a way that I think speaks to the government's lifelong learning agenda and the levelling up agenda. So that feels to me like a mechanism that we can all employ.
Great, thank you, Tim. Sharon, I'm going to come to you next.
Thanks. So I think I'd just like to take a slightly different angle on this, because I think, as Kieran said, we've all got a really great story that we could tell, and we're probably going to get better at telling about our sort of civic roles and what we do and the contributions that we make and so on. But I feel unless we address what, if you like, the mainstream media are really focusing on, which is students and the courses that they're doing, and the fact that there being too many students in debt, they're not doing the right courses, and all the sort of negativity around that side of things. And they are, of course, at the core of what universities are doing. That's what many people will think of first when you say university. It is students going to learn. And if we don't get control back of that narrative and the good work that universities do in educating students, then I don't think everything else, whether it's civic engagement or civic contributions, research and so on, is going to land until we've really got back that message around educating students.
Yeah, very good points. Bob, I'm going to come to you.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe touch upon something that Kieran said, and then on what Simon said at the beginning. My experience is actually we do very well in working with our civic colleagues, and actually we've got a number of strategic partnerships that, and just would like to emphasize what Kieran said, is working with them rather than sort of working in parallel to them. So it's all about the partnership, and we've got, we found that extremely profitable at Portsmouth. I guess ironically, coming back to what Simon said at the beginning, I've not felt, if I'm honest, so I'm laying my cards on the table here, that the region, the HE sector in my region has been as collaborative and collegial as it would have been with other civic organizations. So I think there is a challenge there that I agree with Simon, we should all be working together, but that competition is a hard thing, a hard nut to crack. And I'm not sure it's equally cracked across the country.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, that's great for people to be honest and open about these things. Dave, I'm going to come to you next.
Thank you. Now, I'll make a few points which colleagues may disagree with. I think the first is there's a lot of discussion about civic universities at the moment, and it's great to discuss that and talk about civic universities within the sector and with certain stakeholders. I'm not sure that's the right descriptor when you're trying to engage a narrative with the wider population. And for a lot of people outside the sector, civic relates to large bureaucratic public sector organisations that don't necessarily have the level of value that they would have liked. So I think the concept that we have in mind is really, really important. But how we message it, I think, requires further work depending on the different audiences. I think the second point is we tend to talk about civic universities as if it's a common element. And actually, we've got a really diverse sector within this country, and I think that's a real strength. And different institutions with different missions engage with their populations and communities in different ways. Therefore, however we articulate it has to allow for that local narrative. And I don't think we want to be forced into a position where everybody's trying to do the same, and we end up with this homogenous mess in the middle, rather than these exemplar institutions with different missions and different approaches. And the final point I was going to make, that the key thing to me around one of the roles universities play, irrespective of the mission within this context, it's around partnerships and facilitation. If you look at a lot of the work that's been done around regeneration and growth, both in terms of for individuals and economy, there's often within different regions, different places, a facilitator organisation, sometimes termed an anchor organisation we would perhaps be familiar with, that doesn't necessarily talk about just what it does, but it facilitates partnerships within different local groups to enable things to be delivered for those innovation zones, those areas, collectively, and not always just through the one body. And I think there's a lot more work we can do around that as a sector in terms of how we facilitate. And also, especially at the moment with the current focus on skills, really get across the importance of universities' roles in the full breadth of what we do around teaching, research and innovation. Because in terms of the civic engagement, yes, it's about partnerships and it's about community. But if we don't support and drive innovation at the local level, we're not creating the demand for the skills that we're trying to deliver through the education. And I don't think that's fully appreciated by some of the key stakeholders and politicians. There tends to be silos, and it's saying this is done over here and this is done over here. So I think this is a really, really big question, and it's a really important question. But we need to think about the wording we use with the external audience in mind, not ourselves. And I think we need to recognise the diversity of the sector and emphasise some of the facilitatory work we do, not just the work we do.
Great, thank you, Dave. Nick.
Thank you very much. I'm actually going to pick up on a point that Dave was talking about, which is pre-pandemic in sort of middle 2019, the University of Leeds launched its innovation hub Nexus, and we were right in the middle of going through, as a city region, the MIT REAP Regional Economic Accelerator Programme. And that was us, the Leeds City Council, a number of the other major anchors such as KPMG were all involved in going through this. Come out the other side of, well, I say come out the other side of the pandemic, as we get towards coming out of the pandemic, what's become really interesting is that we're now just recruiting the second cohort of our build program, and that's local entrepreneurs who are having full training on how to take their business to the next stage. They work alongside our early career researchers going through an entrepreneurship program, starting their ideas, established SMEs, through our undergraduate Spark program, all working together in one building and in one digital community, linking through to Grow On Space in the Innovation District next door. And we actually have moved from an idea to producing something that genuinely is joined up. I would love to say that it was beautifully planned that this was going to happen, but actually in some ways the pandemic and the need to think we've really got to move this forward has allowed us to do that, and nobody takes the glory for doing it. All of the people involved have all played a really important thing, and it only works because it involves people from the region, the third sector, the anchor institutions, the students. If you lose any one of those points, it is nowhere near as good as it could be. So I think that point about bringing all the different actors together is absolutely critical for us to be able to genuinely live the story of the value that you add to the region, but also to our students, the skills we equip with them by being able to meet different people from different backgrounds with different desires and skills is actually what's going to set them up to really succeed in the future.
Great, thank you, Nick. I think we've just got time for the final two hands. So Sharon, I'll quickly come to you, and then Robin afterwards.
Sorry, I forgot to take my hand down. I've already spoken, so you've only got one more to get through.
Oh, fine. No worries. Robin.
I'll try to keep it really, really brief because people have responded incredibly well on this question. Just to echo something that Tim said earlier, we have to admit that there is a perception amongst policy makers and the public that the higher education sector has become somewhat bloated over the last decade to the detriment of further education. I think I would agree with the latter, but not wholeheartedly with the former. But I think we're going to have to think quite hard as a sector, as a higher education sector, how we work with further education partners to support them, because they have been underinvested in the past, and we shouldn't, these kind of bright bright dividing lines are not helpful. And I think, you know, I know that a number of people on this call are already doing lots of things in that direction, but I think we have more to do as a sector. And the second thing, in terms of demonstrating value to students, I wanted to get it in before the end. We're about to encounter five to 10 years of kids whose learning has been disrupted because of the pandemic. My 13-year-old almost barged in and interrupted about 2 minutes ago, and I know how much her learning has been disrupted. My 16-year-old even more so. We really need, as universities, to be adapting, thinking hard about how we adapt our learning and teaching so that kids can pick up the time that they've lost in their education. And that would be one tangible way to demonstrate our value.
Thank you, Robin. I think that's an incredibly important point to finish on. Yes, as sadly, that does bring us to the close of the hour, although I'm sure we could all continue talking about this for much longer. So I just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us today and for offering their insights, for provoking a great discussion and some really thoughtful and interesting responses. Kat, I don't know if you wanted to say any words just to sort of sum up there.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone for all your time and insights over the last hour. It's been extremely insightful to hear your perspective on the challenges and opportunities for institutions, but much more for the sector broadly. Just reflecting on some of the key themes that's come out about what we can actually achieve when we come together, and how the crisis that COVID has presented us has actually leapfrogged and provided us with some phenomenal opportunities that I don't think any of us would have been brave enough to think we could have moved our organisations on so far over the last 18 months, but with still a recognition of more to do. The whole aspect of the civic responsibility and the role of the civic university, I think we're at a point in time where there's a great opportunity for a collective rebranding. I think sometimes the economy, and particularly across a number of our regions and cities, don't quite appreciate and understand what we're bringing to them, not just from an employability and an educational perspective, but the whole wider ecosystem that the university brings. So this could be a real opportunity to really rebrand and really make that reaffirmation with the sectors, that what the remarkable things that you can do and achieve for them. It was also really interesting to hear about the cultural shifts that we're seeing between the academic and the PSG staff, and also that culture of adaptability. Who thought we would use these terms about adaptability and change? It seems to be the most prevalent I've ever seen it across the sector. So one of the resounding messages for me that's coming out is about the progress we've made, but yet a long way to go. We've got a lot of key questions and challenges for leadership remaining around the topics that a lot of you brought to life today: inclusivity, digital poverty, levelling up agenda. What is the role of online learning and student experience? We've talked about the new normal, hybrid, but what about high flex? Is there some real learnings that we've seen coming out, particularly out of Ohio State, and some of the new work that's been going on at University of San Francisco? Is there some adaptability we could be looking at there, and how that plays into that equal balance that we're trying to achieve that maybe hybrid's not quite getting us to yet? Co-creation will remain critical, and a huge amount more that we as a sector and leaders can really learn from each other and from the wider partnerships, both with our students, but much more widely as well. I personally feel the challenge that you've all provided and offered today to each other shows the power of our sector, and particularly to the leaders that within it, and how you can come together. I think it's really good that we keep each other honest and share these antidotes to help drive real continuous improvement, as a reminder for the collective responsibility we all share, and particularly for our future generations. I would really welcome to continue the conversation with you all. So if there's anything we can do, if you'd like to reach out or anything you'd like to discuss in more detail, please don't hesitate to contact us. And I really thank you again for giving us the time today for this discussion. Anna.
Thanks, Kat. Yeah, that's a great summary of the discussion. And just to say that an on-demand recording of the roundtable discussion and also a summary article of its key takeaways will be published on the THE website shortly. So thank you to everybody, and we hope to see you again at future THE events.